to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The next item on this evening's agenda is the introduction of board members, beginning to my left.
Zach Middlebrooks.
Billy Carmen.
Adam Danella.
Hodge Patel,
Lauren Holmes.
Nick Horton.
and Zach Stafford is not in attendance this evening. Item 4 on this evening's agenda is approval of the agenda. I'll make a motion to approve tonight's meeting agenda as published by the City of Milton.
Second.
Got a motion by Hodge to approve this evening's agenda as published by the City of Milton with a second by Adam. Any discussion? Seeing that there's no discussion, I'll call for a vote on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Item 5 on this evening's agenda is approval of past meeting minutes. I'll seek a motion to approve the August 20th, 2024 meeting minutes as published by the City of Milton.
I'll second.
I'll make a motion to approve. Hold on. The August 20th, 24. I'll make a motion to approve the August 20th, 2024 meeting minutes.
I'll second.
We had a motion by Adam and a second by Billy to approve the August 20th, 2024 meeting minutes as published by the City of Milton. Is there any discussion? Seeing that there's no discussion, all those, if you were absent at the previous meeting, please abstain. Otherwise, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Those abstaining?
Abstain.
Same.
Item 6 on this evening is consideration of primary variances.
None.
Item 7 on this evening's agenda is consideration of appeals of secondary variances. In accordance with the UDC 12.4.2 variances, secondary variance, the BZA will consider appeals of variance decisions and interpretations made by the department director authorized to grant variance request or interpretation. This type of appeal is considered a secondary variance. Do we have, how many witnesses do we have that are being called, both from the development director side as well as the appellant side?
None.
None?
We have none.
And the appellant side is none as well?
None.
None. Okay, thank you. So procedurally, what I'd like to do is amend the procedures for how this case will be heard. And the case is V24-16. Michael, would you put this on the screen for me, please? One thing that I want to add also is that there will be no public comment during V24-16. The first step in this process is for us to read into the record V24-16. The second step will be for the appellant. We'll have 15 minutes to present their case. During this time, the board members will be able to ask questions of the applicant. And then the third step is for the development director to have 15 minutes to present their case. And during this time as well, the board will be able to ask questions of the development director. The fourth step in this process is to allow for 5 minutes for the appellant to make closing arguments, and the board will not ask questions during closing arguments. The fifth step is development director will have 5 minutes to make closing arguments, and the board will not ask any questions during that time frame. Our sixth step will be the hearing will be closed. And then the seventh is we will open the floor for board to have discussion on it. And then the last step is for the board, someone on the board to make a motion on this hearing. So I'll make a motion to approve the procedure as outlined and posted on the overhead.
I'll second.
We got a motion by Hodge and a second by Adam, procedurally as outlined. Any discussion?
No, I think I think it makes the most sense for the appellant to have the first opportunity to explain the argument of why they're appealing this and to outline what the issues are so that there can be a response from the city and then we can discuss and have a vote.
All those in favor of amending the procedures for this evening's case, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Michael, would you please read into record V24-16? The applicant is Mr. James Napier.
Good evening, board members.
Good evening.
The case is V2416, and this is a secondary variance request. Summary of request. The appellant is James Napier. The address of the appellant is 13655 Hopewell Road. Address of the property for the secondary variance is 2335 Bethany Bend. Here is an aerial map showing the Bethany Bend and Hopewell Road intersection. The hatched blue is the address of the appellant at 13655 Hopewell Road. The three lots on Bethany Bend highlighted are 2335, 2337, and 2341 Bethany Bend. These lots are from the Bethany Bend Estates minor plat, which was platted in October 2023. The zoning is AG1 and located in the rural Milton overlay district. Summary of requests. Secondary variance request challenging the interpretations of the community director regarding 1. Retaining walls to be constructed on property located at 2335 Bethany Bend, Unified Development Code Section 937, retaining walls. 2. Public notification requirements for subdivisions as applied to properties located at 2335 Bethany Bend, Unified Development Code Section 13.1, defined terms, Section 1262H, subdivision, general requirements, compliance with the city procedures. 3. Demolition permit notice requirements for property located at 2335 Bethany Bend, Unified Development Code Section 1286A, demolition permits, findings and purpose. 4. Public notification requirements for demolition permits reviewed by City of Milton Design Review Board as applied to property located at 2335 Bethany Bend, Unified Development Code Section 1286E, demolition permits, public hearing. That concludes the readiness of record from staff.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate it. I apologize. Paul, can you introduce yourself, please?
Certainly. My name is Paul Fricke. I'm an attorney with Gerard and Davis. We are the city attorneys for the city of Milton.
Thank you.
I'll be acting basically as the facilitator administrator for the hearing.
Thanks. Mr. Napier, if you'd like to come up at this time and present your application before the board.
Yeah,
I'd
I'm not
appreciate
really
it.
familiar with this type of procedure or activity, so I appreciate everybody's patience as I try to work my way through it. It's just, all new to me. It's unfortunate that I've had to make this appeal. But I do have pretty much outlined everything that I'm talking about. I do want to mention that I know that when he just presented what was there and what I saw on the agenda, that I actually had another item listed in my actual request when I made the secondary variance appeal. That it actually talks about permitting in general and the way that that's administered by the city in the approval processes. So it's not just for the demolition permit, it's for the entire range of permits that the city would use for development. And that's addressed, of course, in what I've written together in an outline that makes the case of the things that are unfortunately being discovered that are being done that are out of compliance and in violation of the city code with this property that's being built adjacent to my property. So can I hand this out to you guys so you can take a look?
Here, I'll-
But as I've gone through, I've discovered that there's actually.
You may want to hold off until you get back to the mic.
Microphone.
Yeah,
I think it's recorded.
yeah. Thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And actually, there's one other set of documents that references that I've got only 3 copies of, but since there's only 6 of you, perhaps you can share that. Give me a second to find that. I just had it. Oh, there they are. Just to share that one.
Sure.
Those are all the copies that I have. If we need to put it on the overhead, I guess we can.
Mr.
But,
Napier,
yeah.
just for the record, since you've cited a number of UDC provisions, do you have any objections just stipulating that the entire UDC can be part of the record?
I'm sorry, I can't understand you.
Since there are a number of code sections in here, do you have any problem with just stipulating that the entire Unified Development Code can be part of the record for this case? And you can refer to any section?
Yeah.
Dick?
All based on
Thank you.
that and the city code.
That is okay, and the city code is
state
fine.
law. State law as well.
State law is what it is, so that's certainly
So,
fine.
yeah, so that's also referenced as well. So, I don't know where to start on, I can tell you why, what generated my motivation to make this appeal. They clear cut the lot behind me and the whole property, actually, all the way, almost 3 lots across, almost the entire 4.2 acres. I'm not sure the exact total amount, but it's a large amount of clear cutting that took place. So, I assume that was all being followed by the rule of the code. And then one day I woke up at 7:30 in the morning and there was a excavator 50 feet from the back of my house sitting on the hill digging a hole. So I was like, what's going on? That doesn't make sense. So the lay of my land is I'm on a steep slope. This house is being built on the highest point of land on the 4.2 acres, and it's right above the back of my house. So I asked the excavator operator and the superintendent, I'm not sure of his name, he didn't give me his card at the time, what was going on, how, it looks like they're building this right on top of me, and I said, you have 4.2 acres to work with. It's concerning to me that you've chosen to build a house right on top of me when the operator told me that the wall, you're going to put a wall right on my property line. At that time, it was 10 feet outside of the property line. So, that was very concerning to me. And I didn't understand why, with 4.2 acres to work with, when someone's going to build a subdivision that's a planned development, that the city of Milton would allow somebody to build a property that close to me and basically ruin the entire aesthetic of my property and take away my privacy. There was a tree canopy there on top of the hill that's gone. Now sunlight comes in the back of my house. It's completely changed the feel and the safety that I have in my home because I was surrounded by woods, and now there's going to be a $3 million house that's going to be built right on top of me, which I have no idea how tall it's going to be or anything else, but it's obviously going to look right into the back of my house. I mean, it literally goes at an angle right into my back porch and into the entire back windows of my home. So I'm very confused on why the city has allowed that to occur to begin with. So I started to research and I contacted the first thing that happened was I noticed after a large storm that because of the slope, that a large amount of water was suddenly coming into the back of my yard and into where the back of my house is that goes into my basement and pooling because they had clear cut all of the trees, and suddenly I had runoff that wasn't there before. So I made a complaint on the city website and reported that I'm getting erosion from this property being built and there's water coming into my property. So in response to that complaint, I started to look at other things, and I was worried about the wall at that point as well. And I contacted the city and started asking questions about the entire development and that particular lot. So, and I referenced that on the last couple pages, kind of what I went through in my communication with the city. So Yeah, on the 21st of July, I made a complaint on the website, which I mentioned. I was referred by a conversation I had on the telephone with Gary Mullinex, who I believe is a senior, who's, I'm not sure what his, I don't have his title for the city, but he referred me directly to a person named Shuba, as nicknamed Jangam, and she was a senior planner. And I spoke to Miss Jangam on the phone, and she told me that, yes, she thought it was, she didn't know exactly what was going on because a lot of the documents that they were supposed to have had never been given to her by the city, by the builder. So that immediately was a red flag for me. And that call was made on the 24th. Shortly after that, I received a call from the land development manager, a woman named Tracy Wilds, and the arborist. They were together. Arborist named Sandra DeWitt, and they told me that I started asking, why is this being built right on top of me? It doesn't seem like that should be allowed. That's not right. You know, what's going on? And they told me everything's being done by code, that the retaining wall is being built as allowed. And I asked, I'm really surprised that somebody can come in and build a subdivision and build a house right on top of me, and me never even be notified that this is happening. So at that point, I started to research the city code to try to find out, why. I had no idea that this was going to happen. Then suddenly I wake up one day and somebody's building a house directly behind me, right on top of me. So, yeah, so at that point I sent a email to Ms. Wilds, and I said that I didn't agree with her interpretation of the code on how that should be allowed. And she replied to me that if I wanted to make any other objections in regards to interpretation, that I would have to meet with the community development director. So at that point, an appointment was made for me to come in. They said I'd come in and meet in person. So at that point in time, I came in and I met with Ms. Wheeler and Mr. Cardman, and Tracy Wilds was in the meeting as well. And she's the land development manager. So at that point, we discussed what was going on. They wanted to focus on the retaining wall, and I told them at that point I was more concerned about, why the property was even being allowed to be built. It didn't seem like the correct permitting was being filed. I had known that there was a demolition permit. In regards to that particular permit, I discovered that, from my knowledge, I couldn't find any reference to any notification to the public being made that demolition permit was went in front of a board and had been approved. And I read in the code that was required by a public hearing, and that should have been published in the newspaper. And I researched, and I can't find that in the newspaper. So I'm not sure whether or not a public hearing was announced that way. But the code also is somewhat vague, but it references that particular the requirements for public notice, and it refers to the notice rules in the code, which specifically state that affected properties adjacent to the development should be sent notification by mail that permit's going to be reviewed. So, of course, anybody could be aware that that's starting to happen and make an objection if they wanted to, I guess, would be the other reason for that. So anyways, that happened. And then I was told, and from what I read in the code at that point in time also, was that for the next type of approval through the process, that in my interpretation of the code, and I have that in there written towards the top, is regarding whether it's a subdivision or not, and whether it's, a development, a shared common plan development. The city told me in that face-to-face meeting that it was not a subdivision, that each property was an individual lot, and that the developer was doing each one of those individually, and therefore didn't have to follow the rules that are required with the subdivision, which my understanding is that it refers to Chapter 64 in the city code, that you have to make public notice, just like it discussed, as required, exactly the same as with a demolition permit. So, the concern immediately from both those things are that somebody's come in, a developer has bought this large piece of property, And he's being allowed to subdivide it into 3 separate lots. Those 3 separate lots are completely different individual pieces of work. And he doesn't have to go through any of the permitting processes that are required as if it was one whole combined development, which is what's called a common plan.
So are you just,
So-
all right, so as far as that goes in the code section, I mean, you're saying that if it was an individual that bought each individual lot, I mean, that's essentially what it's talking about, right? I mean, there's 3 individual lots with ultimately 3 individual different owners at
Right.
some point in time. You
Sure.
know what I mean?
Yeah, in the future, that's going to be the case, of course.
And it could be done
But
if
it's-
each one was purchased individually. What they did do, if I bought one piece, you bought one piece and somebody else did, then what they have done as a whole, it would not have mattered if we had bought each
I'm
one
not sure I'm
individually.
following you though. I mean, but it wasn't bought that way. They were all bought together.
Right, but I'm saying they're separate individual lands. It's not being developed as a single
Which,
subdivision.
Well,
Is
unfortunately,
that-
it is a subdivision, and I can show you that it's based actually in the code, and it's in the state code on what a common plan is defined as. And actually, interestingly, the developer, Waterford Homes, actually submitted the permit to the state through the notice of intent. I guess it goes to the city because they're the agent. In that notice of intent, it's he filed for a common plan.
Okay, so
It's a common plan.
so the point I guess you're making is that it should be the same, the code should be the same for any common plan subdivision, no matter the size.
That's
Is-
correct.
Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
But the code
And-
doesn't say that for
Um,
3 and less, for 3 lots or less.
Okay, well, that's
That's
relatively vague. That's
what I'm saying.
relatively
That's
vague.
what you're saying, though. That's what your
That's-
argument is
Well,
that
that's part of my
the
argument.
code
That's-
is saying that.
But that's vague because if you look at the way that it's actually written, it's what's defined as a
Minor
subdivision
plat
is
or
separate
whatever.
than minor plat. So it's still a subdivision because a developer bought it. He's marketing it as Bethany Ben Estates. There's a sign out front that says Bethany Ben Estates. He marked all of the property with surveying equipment, and that also is discussed what a common plan is in the state law and in the city code and in the UDC.
I think it'll be helpful if you can cite to a particular decision and then which code sections you assert are that decision.
Okay, I'm not an
violates.
attorney, so I don't have anything to cite. If you're talking to me to talk about a case that took place.
Well, if you're suggesting, rather than suggesting the code in general says something, the board isn't going to be able to comb through the entire Unified Development Code to find a provision that you are asserting has been violated.
Okay,
So it will be helpful to them to make their decision if you can point to a section that you're talking about. And then you may have even provided it to them in your outline.
I
don't
referenced
know.
the state because I believe the state law supersedes the city code when it comes to permitting.
May I jump
I'm
in?
not taking a position. I'm just offering it may be of,
So the state code copies what the city code copies. Well, actually, there's a federal code above that, but the city code is basically a carbon copy of what comes out of the state code and what defines a common plan.
We have 1 more minute of public comment.
well, not public comment, but
Excuse me,
the applicant's presentation.
applicant's presentation.
Oh, I'm on a timer?
Almost.
Okay.
Yeah, well,
So anyways, yeah, throughout this, I mean, I urge you to go through it. Maybe we don't have time since there's a minute left to cover everything. Be nice to have known before I had only 1 minute left, so I could try to move on as I'm getting asked questions in the middle of it. So that's a bit concerning. I request at least another 3 or 4 minutes of time.
Yeah, well, we're keeping a timer too, and try to pause it with questions to give you time in the 15 minutes for your comment. How much more time do you think you need to kind of point to what
5 minutes.
we need to understand what we're looking at from your speaking point? Questions we can ask outside of the time.
Okay.
But from your point, what time? You need 5 more minutes or so?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, I was asked questions, so I started going off of the track of the list of
Okay.
things.
So you think 5 more minutes to
So
get
I
through the
believe
list?
that would be sufficient.
Okay,
I'll make a motion.
give us 1 second.
Yep. I'll make a motion to allow the applicant 5 additional minutes, as well as the development director on their initial 15 minutes. We'll add an additional 5 minutes. So it'll be 20 minutes for the applicant, as well as 20 minutes for the development director, so that we can get a better understanding of where we're at with this case.
So yeah, within city code, all of those things are exactly the same.
Give me
They're
one
gonna-
second.
okay. I realized I was out of time.
They need to take a vote to confirm.
Okay.
Then we'll start it back.
So we've got a motion by Hodge and a second by Nick. Was it
Who was it?
Zach?
Zach.
To allow an additional 5 minutes for the applicant, as well as an additional 5 minutes for the development director, allowing a lot of time for both sides to be 20 minutes. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. You may continue, sir.
I can continue? All right.
Thank you.
So yeah, so in reference to his question, real quick again, yeah, all of those rules, and they're quickly able to be found into the definitions in the UDC and the city code. So the definitions that there are at the beginning or at the end of the code, those are referenced under what common plan is. So it is there and it is in the code for the city, and it's explicit on what a common plan is. So yeah, that's a problem because nobody was notified that the subdivision was going to happen. The subdivision's being developed. Nobody knew it was going to be put in. Myself, my neighbors, no one. Until, they started clearing land. But like I said, I assumed everything was going to, of course, be following procedure until somebody starts digging a hole 50 feet away from my back window in the morning when I wake up. So anyways, yeah, I mean, so from that point on, I did continue with emails with Ms. Wheeler. And I started to bring up other things in the code that I was finding that were wrong, and dispute on what a common plan was. And she told me that we could actually cover all of that information in this meeting. So I didn't file any other appeals. I didn't do anything else, but I went through the code and and I'm trying to find out what's going on with this property, because it seems like the city is working with the developer, and they're circumventing some of the requirements of the code that would be caused if it was a common plan, with the first one being a land development permit, which goes through a different approval process that has more review. There's more studies, there's more things that are required, and whatnot. And the fact that the land disturbance permit was never required, was in question due to it not being a common plan. But the common plan doesn't even have to cover it. And that's what's even more concerning. What's more concerning is that, so under a common plan, you have to have these permits if over an acre is disturbed on all the lots combined. So, but outside of that, you actually have to have the permits if over 1 acre is disturbed on each individual lot. So the builder has clear cut these lots from the street all the way to the woods almost. He's 60 feet, or actually up to 45 feet on the rear on lot 3, which is adjacent to me. He's 45 feet on lot 2. Lot 3 is just partially cleared. He's disturbed over an acre. So disturbing over an acre requires the more advanced permitting process. It appears that he's somehow been able to circumvent the permitting process. I've taken measurements. I know for a fact that over an acre has been disturbed. So that covers that part of it. So with my other investigation, I started to look at, why would they let somebody build on top of me? That ties into the rural Milton overlay. The city architect's supposed to make an analysis of adjacent properties and what effect it would have on them. So I'm arguing that my aesthetic was destroyed, that my well-being has been taken away by allowing them to build a house right on top of me, on top of the hill, directly above my home. I find that very concerning that that was allowed, and the architect could have required, with 4.2 acres to be developed, that the home layout for the three homes on that 4.2 acres be different than building a house right on top of me. There's plenty of room. So also in the research, I found out that the builder's advertising, I couldn't get architectural drawings. I was told there weren't any until yesterday, and now there are. And I was told that I had to make an appointment to come in and take a look at those. Well, I work, I didn't have time to do that. But anyway, so yeah, the builder's advertisement is that the home is 3 stories tall, which is concerning to me, concerning it's right behind me. 3 stories aren't allowed to be built in the Milton overlay. By code, there's only 2 stories allowed to be built. So if that's the case, that's concerning as well.
You including the terrace level as 3 stories?
No. I'm not sure. I haven't seen a drawing of the home. But 3 stories aren't allowed based on the code. It says 2 stories limit. So throughout the code, when it comes to the permitting, clear cutting is not supposed to be allowed. He did come in and clear cut. There's a concern regarding that the proper permit wasn't issued. Even if with a single family dwelling permit, you have to have, based on what I've seen in the code, and it's referenced here, is that you cannot clear cut. And if you do clear cut, you have to leave a 50-foot buffer, which would leave the trees that are required, of course, so they're not being built right on top of.
Mr. Napier, you have 1 minute left.
Okay.
Thanks.
So this is very concerning. It's been discovered that the wastewater and septic tank for the property are being built very close to the property line. The code explicitly states in 9.3.6 that it has to be 60 feet away from the property line. And as of right now, it looks like it's around 21 feet away. And that's evident in the drawings as well. And that's highlighted in blue. Regarding the retaining wall, there's 3 parts to the retaining wall. That's pointed through to with the red arrows in one of those in that supplement that I gave. It's not, and you're only allowed to have 2 walls for a retaining and wing wall. There's actually 3. So that doesn't seem to be following the code. I referenced the steep slopes and the rules around that and how it affects adjacent properties, which is me. So that's detailed very specifically there with references throughout the code. And
About 10 seconds left.
yep, stormwater management. Up until yesterday, there was no documents that were provided to me in my public records request, and I've made 3. Until yesterday, suddenly a file went that had 40 pages in it to 192. And so it seems very strange because I wasn't given the documents until the day before I was coming in, so I could review those and understand what's happening with the property being built next to me. They were apparently made
Thank you.
well before the
We've
other
reached the
records
20
requests.
We've reached the 20-minute
Okay, I
time.
think I covered most everything. Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. We want to address the 4 specific items that Mr. Napier submitted with his secondary variance application and do the best that we can to respond to the additional items that were presented this evening that we did not have the opportunity to really research, but based on our experience would be able to respond to some of those. This is the cover page for the minor plat. And Bethany Bend Estates is a minor plat. As you can see, there are 3 lots that are part of that minor plat. Now, the response with regard to item number 1 has to do with the retaining wall. The issue about the retaining wall, what we heard this evening was that it is very close or right up to the property line. We heard about the height, we heard about the location. What we see is that the red line on the screen is a 25-foot building setback line, and the retaining wall is located within that setback. The code, section 9.37C, says that within yard setbacks, a retaining wall is allowed to go right up to the property line in the side yard, which is the yard adjacent to Mr. Napier's property. It also shows that the height of the retaining wall is allowed to be up to 6 feet, and a wing wall can be as high as 10 feet. I think it's important to note that when we talk about height, the code says that height is measured from grade. And the reason this is important is because the wall that you can see here, where we have an engineered plan of the wall, is actually located, and we show the topography measurements here. The elevation of the green line, which is the elevation line for the property, is at 1080 feet. And the highest point of the retaining wall is 1080.3 feet. So while the retaining wall does not exceed the 6-foot-high maximum, it is actually below grade. It's subterranean. There's only 0.3 feet, just a few inches, that is visible above grade for this retaining wall. So any type of landscaping or any change in the ground, that retaining wall will not be visible to Mr. Napier because it's only 3 inches above grade. The second item that was of concern is the issue of a subdivision. The subdivision of property, meaning dividing up the larger lot into smaller lots, the making of parcels, and the city code identifies and distinguishes between a major and a minor subdivision. The minor subdivision is 3 lots or fewer. The major subdivision is 4 or more lots. Well, obviously, the Bethany Bend Estates is a minor subdivision. And a minor plat is just a drawing of that minor subdivision. So the minor plat is really referencing the fact that the minor subdivision is distinctive from a major subdivision in the requirements, as is seen in another section of the code that talks about the minor plat review process. Minor plat review process is different than a subdivision, a major subdivision review process, in that it doesn't have all of the hearing requirements and notification requirements. All that is required for a minor plat review, remember we're talking about 3 individual lots or fewer, is that the Community Development Department reviews it, makes sure that it's code compliant, and the minor plat, once it's certified and approved, then goes to the City Council for approval.
Let me ask you something real
Yes.
quick. Sorry to interrupt you, but under what I'm looking at, and I'm assuming it's correct, and Paul can tell me if it's not, but this section 50-1 under definitions, subdivision, minor, means a subdivision. I think you already shown it on one of the prior slides, but one more back. Right, here we go. The first thing you've got here, I think that's what I'm looking at here. Subdivision of no more than 3 lots, or where is it? Any number of single-family residential lots provided each are a minimum of 3 acres or more in size. Okay, yeah, so that's the same definition as section 50-1 that he cited in, Mr.
Yes.
Napier cited in his letter.
That's right.
So just to understand this, the way I'm reading this, a minor subdivision is a subdivision of no more than 3 lots,
Correct.
meaning you're combining 3 lots to make a subdivision of 3 lots?
No,
It's just the opposite.
Okay.
no. You're dividing up one larger
Or-
piece of property into 3 smaller pieces.
Okay. A subdivision of no more than 3 lots. Okay. Or any number of single-family residential lots provided each are a minimum of 3 acres or more in size.
Which doesn't apply in this case because they're 1 acre each. So you don't need to read the second half of that definition because it's not applicable.
Yeah. I mean, the way I'm reading it is actually opposite of that. I mean, I'm reading it as it's a minor subdivision would be combining no more than 3 lots and then subdividing them, a subdivision of no more than 3 lots.
No.
And then if you're going to subdivide one large lot into smaller lots, it's got to be at least 3 acres.
No.
But that's not,
No.
okay.
So the original lot size was 4.5 acres.
That's correct.
And they've subdivided it into a minimum of 1 acre lot sizes. Is that
4.29 was the original, and I have the sizes on the record if needed.
Well, I don't think there's any question that they're 1 acre.
Uh,
Yeah, no, and
Less
they're
than
at
three.
least 1 acre.
1.5,
There's no-
1.4, and 1.3.
All right. So,
Taking,
so that's basically what we're doing.
cannot create more than 3 lots.
Right. And it's not necessarily how it reads, is what I'm saying. But go ahead. But if that's the intent,
That is, yes.
is to
that-
create no more than 3 lots.
Right, that's right.
okay.
It's to take one large piece and divide it into smaller pieces. If you take a large piece and divide it into 4 or more smaller pieces, then it's a major subdivision. Anything less than that, 3 or fewer, it's a minor subdivision, also called a minor plat. And the minor plat has a different trajectory, different development process, permitting process than the major subdivision. The major subdivision is inherently, by definition, a larger subdivision that has a greater impact. So when you have a greater impact, you have greater requirements for notification, for review, but a minor subdivision, 3 or fewer lots, is inherently something that impacts very few people, primarily just the individuals abutting the minor plat. And so that's the process. Now, with regard to land disturbance, there was a question about, or the issue raised, that there was no land disturbance permit issued for this development. And that is true because the land disturbance permit requirement says that, one is required unless there is just a building permit. And in the case where you have single-family residences where construction disturbs less than 1 acre, and it's not part of a larger common plan of development, then it doesn't require a land disturbance permit. That is the case with Bethany Bend Estates. The total acreage is more than 1 acre, but we're not looking at the total because we have 3 individual building permits for 3 individual sites that happen to be built by one builder. But it's not a common development because there are no shared streets. There's no, like in a typical subdivision where you go down a street, there's no common street. There are no common features, no common areas. They're just 3 individual lots that happen to have the same builder. So it is not a common development.
So with those 3 individual building permits, there's no site crossover between the 3 individual permits?
That's right. They're just 3 individual permits that one builder happens to be building. 2 of the sites happen to be building concurrently. The third one he hasn't even started on, but he could build them individually. He has individual permits for each one, and they each are their own separate parcel, platted as its own separate
So then it
parcel.
wasn't clear-cutted the entire 4 acres?
No, he didn't clear cut. What he did was he created a building site on each individual lot that was under an acre, because remember, it has to be under an acre because the entire site is only about an acre or a little over. So excluding the setbacks, which have to remain untouched, which in the side yard is going to be graded to accommodate that retaining wall that can go right up to the property line, but the rear setback is not touched. And so the grading is absolutely less than an acre on each site.
So just to be clear, I mean, the setbacks, it doesn't mean they can't be touched as in a buffer. It's just a non-buildable area.
That's not buildable for a building, correct. You can build a retaining wall or a wing wall, and that sort of thing. So that's why we know that the clearing is less than an acre. And so under that scenario, grading is tied in with the building permit. It is not required as a separate land disturbance permit, although the same processes, I mean, we go out and we make sure that erosion control protections are in place, and all of the other things that are required, tree save and everything else. It's just on a smaller scale because we're only talking about 3 individual lots.
So you do a pre-construction
Yes.
site for each lot?
Every lot.
And those
Alright.
building permits were not issued until the minor plat was recorded, is that correct? Is
That's
that the normal
correct.
process?
That's absolutely
Yeah.
correct. So again, here are the minor plat for the 3 lots. An application for a demolition permit was submitted to the Community Development Department, and that permit was approved, and it was issued a few weeks later, and that was back at the beginning of this year. But with a demolition permit for a single-family home, a public notice is not required. And so we don't, every time a building is demolished, an individual home or porch or a barn or something like that, we don't issue notices or notify neighbors or put an ad in the paper. It's not a requirement for a single-family home.
So it's similar to if I pulled a building permit, you wouldn't notify my neighbors. I was
No,
pulling
we
a-
wouldn't.
Yeah, demolition is the same, permit is the same process. similar
Exactly. It's the same process, kind of in reverse.
In terms of notification.
Exactly.
Okay.
So there was an application for a demolition permit submitted to the Design Review Board because that is our requirement. And the code specifically stipulates that when a demolition permit is issued for review by the Design Review Board, then a notice must be put in the Milton Herald, and a notice has to be sent to the property owner. And we have documentation to verify that both of those things were done. But there is no requirement for adjoining property owners or nearby neighbors or any other people to be notified. It's only the newspaper and the property owner. That's the only requirement for DRB review. So
How long has that been in place for? How many years, do you know, or?
I
since the
don't know.
city-
Do you know?
Since I've been here,
Okay.
at least 3 years.
Okay.
So if you'll get the,
And you may get to this, but as far as the minor plat,
yes.
can you explain the process of how a minor plat gets approved and from when somebody applies for that minor plat and what process it goes to get approved as a minor plat?
Yes, the drawing of the plat is submitted to the city, and the city distributes it throughout the various departments for comments with regard to the arborists and the trees, public works with regard to if there are any improvements that need to be made to the right-of-way. We have engineers that look at hydrology. We have folks that look at traffic impacts. We have the zoning, obviously the zoning folks who look at, you know, any types of setbacks, buffers, and other requirements. We have folks that research the history of the property to see if there are any outstanding issues associated with the property. And so there's a review process. And once that review process is completed, we then go through, as I showed on the previous slide, the process of then sending that to the city council. Of course, that's advertised, the city council meeting, and the city council then approves. They can deny, but in this case, they approve the plat. And once the plat is approved, then it has to be recorded. And once it's recorded and we get a copy of that recorded plat, then we are in a position to issue building permits for the individual lots. Then, of course, the builder has to submit the plans, and then the individual building plans are reviewed for zoning compliance and building compliance and erosion control and other things. Before the site can be developed in any way, the builder has to put up their erosion control, best management practices in place to ensure that there's no runoff off the site, that any important specimen trees that were identified are protected. And so then the site is made ready. And after that building permit is issued, then they can go ahead and get started on construction.
So 2 follow-up questions. to
You've
that.
got about 3.5 minutes left, just to, you know.
One, what are the notice requirements for city council? Is it the same as the DRB requirements that you talked about the same notice requirements for city council meetings and agendas as the DRB city council, or city
Well,
meetings and agendas?
I don't know exactly if they follow the exact same requirements. I do know that the agendas are posted on the city's website. They're posted at City Hall. I don't know how far in advance they advertise if it's in the newspaper. But other than that, I think there's notification provided, but there's not individual neighbor notifications.
Sure. Go ahead if you got.
One of the questions that Mr. Napier brought up was the location of the septic field. Can you touch on that for a little bit? And what is the city's involvement in terms of approving septic systems?
Well, and real
yeah.
quick, similarly, same thing would be in regard to the 3-story question that he had as well, and how, same thing, what the process would be for that.
Well, the process for the height that's regulated by the zoning code, and we know what the maximum height is, and we measure from grade, usually to the midpoint of the roof or some other such thing, to make sure they're not going to exceed the maximum that's allowed. Now, that doesn't mean it isn't a tall building, and that wouldn't have, an impact to the neighbor in terms of visually, but it's not going to be more than what the code allows. Otherwise, they would have had to apply for a variance. With regard to the septic whole system, that's a Fulton County issue. Fulton County has to approve, their health department has to approve the septic system, and they look at the location, and they have requirements as well for how far away it is from structures, whether it be neighbors or the house itself. And so that has to be approved as well. But I would like to point out one other thing, because Mr. Napier raised the point about the common area. He reached out to the EPD. Can you switch?
Yeah, she's doing it.
So he reached out to Mr. Brandon Rufo, the EPD, the Department of Natural Resources at Georgia, and talked about all of these issues. And the conclusion that was received from Mr. Rufo was that it has been determined that the site does not require a land disturbance permit or land disturbance permit through the state of Georgia, because each site has an individual erosion control plan, and the EPD has determined this is not a common development. So while the city didn't solicit an independent assessment of its process, we are nevertheless pleased to receive an independent, unsolicited affirmation of our process from the state. So they believe that we followed not only our requirements, but their requirements in terms of the processes for these 3 individual lots. So I just wanted to sort of leave that with you so that you can understand, while there were issues and concerns, there was, unbeknownst to us until recently, an independent analysis of our processes, and it was confirmed that what we do is the way it should be done. Just want to leave you with that.
And let me ask you another
At the end of the 20 minutes.
If they are done with the 20 minutes, the board is free to ask questions of either side if they like.
Okay.
So he brought up this 9.3.6 wastewater pump and lift stations, and he referenced a 50-foot buffer and 10-foot improvement setback. Can you
Yeah.
explain the difference between that and a septic system?
Well, what I would like to say is this. What is scheduled and what has been advertised this evening are those items that were part of the secondary variance. Any additional extraneous issues that were brought up this evening that we do not have a chance to review, I think are beyond the scope of this hearing tonight, because they were not included in the application, and we have not had a chance to review any of those types of questions that were not part of the original application.
Paul, can you weigh in on that?
That is certainly a fair statement, and that was part of what this board has to address a specific decision by the director that has been challenged and find a reason to affirm or deny that decision in whole or in part. In order to reverse the decision, there needs to have been an actual decision rendered, and there be a basis for overturning that decision. So if there has not been a specific decision with respect to a wastewater pump and lift station,
My question is related to, is that the same as a septic system? Or are those different things?
They are two different things.
Okay.
So, Paul,
What you had said is the city has no control over the septic systems whatsoever.
That's correct. It's a Fulton County issue.
Perfect. Okay.
Paul, in summary, so our consideration this evening, based on the appeal, are the 4 items that Michael read in earlier. If there were other issues, such as the lift station, that are brought up, that is not necessarily part of our decision this evening.
that's correct. They were not part of the appeal,
The appeal
and
and submittal.
before this hearing, then they cannot be considered. They can be presented going forward if they're timely, with respect to the decision that was allegedly made. But for the purposes of tonight's meeting, we can't consider anything that wasn't considered part of the original application.
Thanks. Mr. Napier, if you would like to come up and make a closing statement, you have 5 minutes available for that.
Thank you. May I start?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, just to reference what she talked about. So correct, it was divided into minor plats, but it is also a minor subdivision. Subdivisions require public notice and require notification of neighboring properties as based in Chapter 64 of the City Code. So that wasn't done, and that's very concerning because I had no idea that they were going to build a neighborhood next to me, or a house right on top of me. And then also in addition to that, it's also contradictory to the communication that I had with Ms. Wheeler prior to the meeting. She said that it wasn't a minor subdivision, period, even when I met with the city. So it's kind of thrown me some confusion on, why they wouldn't call it what it was up front. So I believe it's because of the public notice requirement. And then when it comes to the land disturbance, I did mention that permitting was what I had requested to discuss, and I have a document that states that it's in reference to that decision making when I made my variance request. Because they put demolition on it is concerning, because it was to the entire permitting process in general. But for the land disturbance permit, I'm curious, Ms. Wheeler, who measures that 0.98
I'm sorry, you
acres?
can't direct questions. You need to address the board with your closing
Okay,
statement.
I'm curious on how the city determines that the 0.9 acres on 2 of the lots and the 0.9 acres are the amount disturbed. Because she's correct, on paper, that's what the builder has written and claims, or the developer. But in reality, he's cleared over an acre on lot number 3, which is adjacent to me. And I've taken measurements personally, and he's gone over that. He's clear cut so far back that he's eliminated, he has a tree protection plan that he's required to have by the city. And he has only left 9,000 square feet of trees. And I've written that in that information as well. But he's claiming in his tree plan that he has 16,000 approximately. And I'm speaking off the top of my head. I'm not referencing my notes, but the exact numbers are in that documentation that I shared with you. So, he's clear cut well beyond what the tree allowance is. And it appears he's including the trees on my property, the property to the rear corner, and potentially trees. I don't know how he's coming up with the forested area calculation, because mathematically it doesn't calculate that way. It's also questionable on a tree that is on a boundary property that he's claiming that is probably not on the property line or touching the property line. That's actually on the neighbor property, and he's taking a large credit for the tree canopy on that as well. Very concerning because he's using that to get away with building that house the way that he is in that exact location without having to leave a certain amount of existing trees, which is what's required in the code for tree canopy. So it all ties together because there's a pattern here. He's avoided the disturbance permit, which we required an actual site visit by the arborist to make a report that he's following the tree canopy plan. There's been no such report made to my knowledge. It's not in the public records request information that I obtained. And I believe that the city is basing everything on the builder's word, when in fact the developer has gone over the 1 acre. It is a common plan. It's over an acre on more than one piece of land. However you want to look at it, he's still over the amount that he's allowed. He should have had a land disturbance permit. He knew that up front. He falsified his documentation in the NPDES permit that ends in 03, which you have reference to. And if you look, you'll see an area that says land disturbance, and he put 0.23 acres. So he claimed on that common plan that he has for lot 1, 2, and 3, that lot 2 was going to be 0.25 acres of land disturbance, lot 3 was going to be 0.23 acres of land disturbance. And I believe he did that in order to avoid the procedure that's required to have a land disturbance permit. Then he gave the plans to the city. It has 0.99 acres actually, and that's referenced in one of those drawings as well, not 9.98, but that's all he's going to disturb. But when in fact he clear cut all of it, and it's significantly more than 1 acre disturbed. And especially if you include when he has to dig a ditch, you can see to put in the sediment, or not the septic lines, the gravel, that adds another 5,000. So, I mean, he is well over 1 acre. The land's been disturbed, it's been clear cut, and it appears that nobody's checking his work. Who's doing the measurements? I did them. I can tell you, no one's been out there that I'm seeing in a report to measure it when I do a public records request. That's very concerning to me. I brought this up at the beginning, back in July 20th or 21st, whenever I submitted it and started talking to the city, and no one's come and checked that part of the work. So it appears they're trying to avoid the land disturbance permit. I'm not sure what the motivation is, other than the fact that maybe it's more administrative work. Maybe they're trying to help this guy get around the requirements. But the law also states that if a land disturbance permit is required, the fact that the city didn't require you to get it does not allow the builder to not follow the rules of the law. And that if he didn't follow the rules of law and it's proven that it was done intentionally, then he's in violation of the code that would require him to, that required him to have that particular permit, land disturbance.
Thanks. If you
So
don't
it's
mind,
very concerning.
if you don't mind wrapping up, we're at 6
Sure.
minutes, actually. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have one more thing to say. So in regards to the common plan also,
Let me defer to Paul on this. Paul, you want to weigh in?
Well, I mean, its time has, the 5 minutes you've set has expired.
It has expired yet.
It's up to you to amend that time limit as you see fit.
may we request 30 seconds?
I'll do a motion to amend for 1 more minute of time for each party. Make it 6 minutes.
I'll second.
We had a motion by Adam and a second by Billy to add an additional 1 minute for closing statements, both from the applicant as well as the development director. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously. We will,
Okay, so when it comes to this being a common plan, it sounds like there's a lot of assumptions being made. First of all, that permit was submitted that is a common plan permit, so that's interesting. I'm not sure why he would have that, but not actually, the city wouldn't call it a common plan. On top of that, there's shared grading. There's actually a shared entrance that for the properties as well. So, there's shared clear cutting all done at the same time, and there's also shared grading. They're sharing dirt between the 2 lots that are currently under construction. I mean, it is a common plan. It's shared, and I'm not understanding why it's not being done, because if it is done, then that land disturbance permit is required, and that would be the only explanation. So, all right.
thank you. I
I'm done.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Diana, if you'd like to come forward at this time and present your closing arguments, I'd appreciate it.
I certainly do acknowledge that the Unified Development Code can be confusing, especially to someone who is not familiar with it. City staff works with it day in and day out and is very familiar with all the different aspects of it. And so where one part of the code may say something, such as the word subdivision, and people may read that and try to interpret it in its plain English definition. Zoning definitions are really quite specific, and so that's why there's a whole definition section in our UDC. And the term subdivision is divided into major and minor. And I think we've done, hopefully, a reasonably good explanation, and we've provided an explanation of what the difference is between a major subdivision and a minor subdivision is, and the fact that the minor plat is a drawing of that minor subdivision, which has a different set of requirements for notification and for review. And so we've, I think, adequately, hopefully, addressed that issue with regard to the whole subdivision issue. When you have a minor plat and 3 individual homes on 3 individual sites, a land disturbance permit, which you would normally have for a major subdivision, is not required. Only a grading plan with each individual building permit is required. Now, the same things are taken into consideration, just on a smaller scale. Making sure that there are adequate controls for erosion, making sure that there's no water runoff, making sure that the trees are protected, and making sure that the roadway's protected. So we have all of those protections in place. It's just a smaller process because it's a smaller project. So I think we've addressed the point about the subdivision, about the land disturbance permit. I think we've also addressed the point about the fact that demolition permits don't require notification to adjoining property owners, and the design review board process doesn't require notification to adjoining property owners, only the paper and the property owner of record for the property to be subdivided. So all of those issues, I think we have addressed and have shown that we took care of those and reviewed those in accordance with the city's rules and regulations. The ordinances have all been followed. Now, when we review these things, the subdivisions, minor plats, anything that we review in the office has to be field verified by our inspectors. We have a whole team of folks, the folks that do the work in the office, but then the folks that go out in the field and make sure that what is put on paper and permitted is what actually gets built. So we have inspectors, they've gone out. If the builder goes astray and goes too far out and it goes beyond the bounds, they issue stop work orders, there are penalties, there are corrective actions that have to be taken. I'm not saying that things don't happen out in the field, because they do. In this particular case, I'm not aware of anything. That doesn't mean that we aren't going to have inspectors going out there on a regular basis, because this is an active construction site. So we will field verify all of these things as the inspections go, inspections get made and the people go out there and look at these things. I think the suggestions that there were some things that were done that were not in accordance with code for whatever reason, some nefarious motivations, none of that is true. The fact of the matter is, while this is a unique situation for the appellant, it is a routine situation for the city. We review these minor plats on a weekly basis, and there are quite a few of them in Milton, and the process is the same for all of them. So I just wanted to bring to your attention that all of these things, we believe, have been addressed in a consistent way, in a way that is code compliant, and that all of our processes were followed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Possible to add one more item to rebut?
No,
That's no.
time is, both times have been expired.
So I'll close this portion of the hearing, and I will open up to the board for discussion.
So I think the way, just from the definitions of a subdivision, a minor subdivision, I mean, whichever way, if I read it one way, it's the other part. If you read it the other way, it's the first part. That this lot being divided into 3 smaller lots complies with a minor plat subdivision. And, you know, a common plan, under the way I understand it, is a common plan to where it's finished as a common plan area. This is 3 individual unique lots, which are all separate. There is a company's common plan to build individual lots, but it is not a common plan under the code, the way I understand that definition.
That's because the driveways aren't shared, there isn't a common space, whether it's
Right.
swimming
No,
pool or
yeah,
amenities, et cetera.
Right, there's no little cul-de-sac with 3 houses on it or anything like that, to make it a common plan. The other thing, you know, it sounds like the majority of the issues aren't necessarily the process that the city has taken in issuing what requests were made, but more so what's being done at the site and whether or not inspections are showing that the right permits were given, the developers are following the permits properly, they're not exceeding the scope of the permits, at which point, if that were to happen, based on an inspection, code enforcement would address that. As far as notice provisions, I think there's a difference between what's required by notice to specific adjacent properties and, you know, public notice. I think there is public notice for the demolitions. There's public notice for the original minor plat that goes through the city council process, through the DRB process. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to have been heard on those issues prior to city council approving a minor plat in this instance. And then from there, going through the process of getting the building permits. And like I said, each one's individual. So, you know, I don't think that despite the fact they're building and utilizing resources from adjacent, you know, their adjacent owned properties, ultimately, these are going to be 3 individual unique properties. I don't see where any decisions from the city would have been incorrect in how they made these determinations based on the individual permits and plans.
In terms of providing notices, I think there's a separation there. The public notice that's published on the website, that's either posted in front of the property, however that's done, versus physically receiving a letter. I think that's where the difference, I think, is in terms of understanding or interpretation
Right.
of did an adjacent property or the applicant receive notice.
Yeah. And the code doesn't.
There isn't a requirement on the demolition to provide notice
To adjacent neighbors.
to an adjacent property.
Yeah.
And then on the minor plat, because it falls under minor plat, it's a 4.5 acre or 4.25 acre lot that's being subdivided into 3 separate lots. Notice to the adjacent properties is not required, but notice is given through city council approving that minor plat at their meetings.
Yeah.
And I was going to add this, just before any motion is made, I wanted to read the options that the board had with respect to taking action, and this is from the bylaws. On secondary variances, the board may vote to affirm an order, requirement, or decision wholly or partly, may reverse an order, requirement, or decision wholly or partly, or clarify by presenting an interpretation of the text in the form of a statement of clarification. That requires an identification of, if there is to be a decision to reverse, you would need to identify the order, requirement, or decision being reversed, and what, you know, the basis for that was, and what the or if you were clarifying what your alternative interpretation would be.
Anybody else have any comments or discussion? I think the only other thing I would add is that based on the lot sizes and the independent review of the lot sizes, that, you know, building permit is appropriate under the circumstances, which kind of affirmed what the city's decisions were on a building permit as opposed to a land disturbance permit. So.
I have a question, I guess, Paul, about the tree saver and the clear cutting. I understand if they have removed trees, what they remove, they have to replace at some point to get the tree canopy back to where it is, right?
I'll be honest with you that there's no evidence of what was there before in order to evaluate what was taken down afterwards and at what time, whether it was before or after a lot was prepared in order to evaluate whether it complies with the tree ordinance.
Okay.
And I didn't. So I can't really answer whether or not it complies
Okay.
or not.
But the arborist would have to sign off before they would issue.
And the
CO.
arborist did.
Yeah, I'm saying,
Okay.
before they issue the CO, each of those departments that
Yes.
initially signed off will have to go back and sign off before certificate of occupancy is
Yes,
issued.
it will be evaluated throughout the process.
That was my question.
I can't speak to it, for purposes of this.
Any further discussion?
No, but just for point of clarity, so they did submit the minor plat approval to the city council through the director after they determined that the application was complete. They then got consent from the city council confirming that it was indeed a minor plat, which then would put out public record or notification
It's
into the
recorded
paper
in
where
the
it
public
was
records,
recorded.
but yeah, it just being recorded means just filed with the county. So it
Okay,
wouldn't have been noticed after that point to anybody. It would just be recorded to be a land record.
okay.
The applicant would receive notice on it. The property owner.
Oh, the property owner.
Property
of
owner.
course. Yeah.
Outside of
Right.
that.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have any more questions.
Any further discussion? I'll make a motion on V 24-16 on all 4 points that we had for consideration this evening to affirm the decision of the development director based on the facts that were presented to us this evening and the points that we brought up during discussion as well.
I'll second.
Second.
We've got a motion from Hodge and a second from Adam to affirm the decision on V 24-16 on all 4 items on the secondary variance. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. The motion passes unanimously. Item 8 on this evening's agenda is old business.
None?
Item 9 is new business.
None?
Michael, one question for you. How many applications or cases do we have for the next meeting?
We actually do not have any applications for October,
Okay.
but I would expect around 3 for November.
Okay. And then during that November meeting, we'll have a draft calendar available for
Absolutely.
2025. And then in December, we can make a vote on that.
I'll take care of that.
Item 10 on this evening's agenda is adjournment. I'll make a motion to adjourn this evening's meeting.
I'll second it.
Got a motion from Hodge to adjourn and a second from Billy. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. This meeting is adjourned.